Jim, I guess our first question, we've chosen this book to allow people to do some reflection, as Jane said, throughout the Lenten season. We wanted to know what your inspiration for this book, The Seven Last Words of Jesus. I should pick this up and put that on the screen.
There it is. I really love that cover. That's one of my favorite covers. Yeah, well, the inspiration, first of all, thanks to Eric and Jane for inviting me, and thanks to all of you for joining me. The inspiration is pretty easy. I was asked to give the Seven Last Words meditation at St. Patrick's Cathedral by Cardinal Dolan, which was a huge honor for me and kind of unexpected. And so I thought that, after I did these reflections, I thought I could turn it into a small book. And if you read each of the chapters, they're the length of a kind of longish homily. And so I really didn't do a whole lot of editing and additions to what I gave. And I think I say that in the book, what I gave at St. Pat's, I guess, in maybe like 2014, something like that. But I didn't realize that there are quite a few books out also on the same topic, also by people like me who've been asked to do Seven Last Words liturgies. But it's, it was also an outgrowth from a lot of the work I did on the Jesus a Pilgrimage book, it's some of those same themes, historical Jesus stuff, and using some of the same insights. But it really, is thanks to Cardinal Dolan that that book exists.
Yeah, there has been some tradition, I would say, from my experience in other Christian traditions, to do this Seven Last Words devotion on Good Friday, right? So it's sort of crept into the Catholic Church a little bit. But can you say more about the history of that devotion to focus on these last seven words, and why seven phrases in Scripture around Jesus's death? Why not 9 or 10?
Yeah, it's a little murky. You're right. Where did it start? I trace a little bit of that in the book, and there's a kind of sort of a development of it becoming almost, becoming a liturgy, basically, that people are familiar with, oftentimes on Good Friday. And Jane, it was funny when I first went to the Seven Last Words, I thought, seven last words, Jesus, he says more than seven words on the cross. I didn't understand it. And I think the first one I went to was as a Jesuit at St. Ignatius Church in New York City on Park Avenue. I thought, what is seven last words? Well, it's a strange kind of way of saying it, really, phrases. It's seven last phrases. But to answer your question, these are all the phrases that Jesus says on the cross in each of the four Gospels. And one of the things that I think surprises people, about these phrases or words, is that they're not the same in every Gospel. So I go through at the very beginning, like where each one is. And one of the sort of surprises / disappointments for some people is if they're reading, one Gospel and they're getting to the part of the Passion narrative. For example, if you're doing the spiritual exercises and you're reading one Gospel and you say, oh, I love where Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? It's not there. And people say, where is it? Like, oh, it's in the other one. Which doesn't mean that it didn't happen, or it means that, these particular ones or phrases or words were the phrases or words or sayings, you would say, or whatever you want to call them, that they considered important, that passed down through their community. So a lot of it is also why are particular ones in particular places. So that's what it means. So the seven last words are from all the Gospels, all the things that Jesus says on the cross. And these things have been pulled into a kind of liturgy, or sort of quasi-liturgy. I doubt any liturgical scholars out there if it counts as a liturgy, but there's usually the reading of the word or the phrase, a meditation, usually a song, maybe time for prayer. I find that one of the best parts of Good Friday. I really do. And I find that personally, now people might not agree with me. I find the Good Friday liturgy, the liturgy itself of Good Friday, kind of a grab bag of things, like you venerate the cross, you do this, you do that. But I just find the 7 last words a more of a kind of cohesive liturgy. And I've been to ones, particularly at St. Ignatius, where they have people from different Christian denominations do it. So that's also, it's a great place to have different Christian denominations. It's also a great and wonderful place for women to preach. One of the few places where a woman can get up and be perfectly permitted to do that. I just think it's a great opportunity for women preachers. But I find that for me, I sometimes miss the actual liturgy of Good Friday, and I go to the 7 last words.
Yeah, and so thank you, Jim. If you're all looking those phrases, and it's in the inside cover of the jacket, the one phrase is, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing. Truly, I tell you, today you will be with me in paradise. My God, why have you forsaken me? Woman, here is your son, here is your mother. Father, into your hands I commend my spirit. I am thirsty, and it is finished." So, Jim, you talked about the liturgy itself. Do you have any suggestions for anyone that would want to pray with those throughout Lent as a sort of a preparatory setup? It sounds like you would suggest find one of those and go to it in your locale for these types of liturgies. Anything else you would recommend about praying?
Yeah,
with these phrases?
Eric, that's a really great question. I think that, so Lent is, the 40 days. So, roughly, what is it, 4 or 5 weeks this year? I can't remember roughly.
I will go fact check while you're talking.
That's okay. Yeah, fact check.
6
weeks. 6 weeks.
6. Yeah.
So, one thing to do might be to read one of those, if it's one a week, read one of those a week, maybe read one chapter a week, that would be one thing. The other thing would be to maybe take one passion narrative. I think it's just good to focus on one gospel and maybe go through it meditatively. These are, for a lot of people, these are really difficult readings because of the locale, because of where it happens. And I think one of the things in a sense, to guard against in Lent is to have a sort of appropriate appreciation of the blessings that are going on in your life, right? So if you're going to be meditating on these readings or these phrases, maybe one at a time for 6 weeks, or if you're going to do the passion narrative the whole Lent, I think it would be really important to remember that your whole spiritual life, it probably cannot be or shouldn't be focused just on the suffering. Do you know what I mean? It's a really heavy thing to do. So in the spiritual exercises of St. Ignatius, as a lot of people know, there's the 3rd week, right, where people pray over Jesus's passion and death in the 3rd week, and that's only 7 days, right? And so I think just to be attentive to the fact that you're just not all, focused on suffering, so to balance it out by looking at the rest of your life. Do you know what I'm saying? Just to have some balance there, because 6 weeks of just nothing but meditating on suffering is, it's kind of difficult for people. And I see, I'm taking care of my mom now, who's very old and ill. I see some people of a certain age. You have enough suffering and illness and stuff like that in your life without having to focus on it entirely. So, focus on it and see what comes up. But I would just say to balance it out with some meditation on, where God has blessed you.
I think that's very helpful, because one of the things we're asking people to use as a base for some Lenten meditation, but also to know we should balance it, make it not the only Lenten meditation that's going on.
Yeah. Lent is a time of preparation, right? Alms, prayer, fasting. But it is also it's also preparation for Easter too, right? And so where can you kind of prepare to meet the risen Christ as well? So I'm very attentive to not having people just plunge into misery for 6 weeks.
But you have you've taken each of these phrases or words and phrases, and you've given us examples from your own life of what those words meant for you. So I think you already are helping us stay above just being with the suffering Jesus if we're going to be reflecting and praying over these phrases, and then looking into our own lives and relationships to see how they might apply. So you were on your own path, I guess, Jim, when you were writing this, to add some of those personal stories. Are there any from your readers, people you know who have read this book and found it very personally moving for them in their lives?
Yeah, I think the one that people have told me that is the most, I mean, even before this book was published, the one that is the most powerful for them, that's not everybody, is my God, why have you forsaken me? Or why have you abandoned me? And I just think that everybody feels like that. And it is such a mysterious thing to know that Jesus said this. And, one of my, my New Testament professor in graduate school, who was a real, I'm sure you've heard of him and certainly heard of me talk of him, Father Dan Harrington, used to talk about criteria for sort of assessing whether or not something comes directly from the lips of Jesus. And this is also something that historical Jesus scholars talk about. And one of the criterion is called the criterion of embarrassment. So the idea is, if anything could be seen as possibly embarrassing to the early church, or, sort of in the portrayal of Jesus, there's no way that it's made up. So one of the great examples is the baptism of Jesus. That's kind of embarrassing. Like, why is Jesus, John the Baptist comes preaching a baptism of repentance of sins, and Jesus gets baptized. And in all the Gospels, you see the Gospel writers kind of subordinate John, right? Like, I am the less, I must decrease, he must increase, I'm not worthy, because they had to kind of position it so that people were clear that Jesus is over John, which of course he was. Another of those examples is, my God, why have you abandoned me? I mean, in a sense, it does not look good, to have Jesus say that to the Father. And so historical Jesus scholars and Dan Harrington would say that we can be sure that he said this, right? Now, the question is, what is he saying? Is he just saying that one verse, or is it kind of a shorthand for that whole psalm?
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if I said, the Lord is my shepherd. Now, for people who don't know that psalm, they'd say, oh, Jim Martin's saying that God is his shepherd. That's nice. But for people who know the psalm, they know the whole thing. The whole, the Lord is my shepherd sort of conjures up all these, the beautiful images of, my cup runneth over, through green valleys, blah, 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 the whole thing. So a lot of scripture scholars say that when Jesus is saying, my God, why have you abandoned me? He's kind of quoting the whole psalm, which is, really a psalm of kind of deliverance and God kind of answering. Nonetheless, it's quite a thing for him to say on the cross. And, I think for me, one of the most helpful sort of understandings of Jesus's humanity and his divinity is from Elizabeth Johnson, who draws from the work of Karl Rahner, who said that, perhaps even Jesus on the cross didn't know what he was being asked to surrender to, right? And that makes his sacrifice and his obedience, right, even more complete. And so this, to me, is kind of a sign of that maybe he really does. I don't think he believes he's abandoned, but he feels he's abandoned. And the point is, don't we all, at some point in our lives, don't we all feel, where are you? And I just think it's such a great, I think I say in the book that line is where his life probably most intersects with our own. I mean, that's a really, he's human and divine in all times, but that's a really human thing to say. It's just, so Jane, I think that's the one that people really resonates with a lot of them.
Thank
Jim,
you.
I know a lot of this material has been from Jesus, a Pilgrimage, another book that you've done, and some experiences in the Holy Land. I know you've led different pilgrimages for America and different groups there. as you're thinking about these phrases and stuff, are there particular sites or experiences you've had in the Holy Land that come to mind? Even if you're praying with these 7 phrases, are you thinking of a specific scene or spot?
Well, in the Holy Land, there's the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and maybe people have heard of it. I didn't know what it was going to look like, or I don't know. And when you go in, it's this ancient church. It's in the heart of Jerusalem, for people that don't know. So in Jerusalem is the section called the Old City, which is walled, right? Just like you would expect, like the walls of the city and the city gates. And then more or less in the middle of the city is the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the church where Jesus is buried, but also the Greek Orthodox call it the Church of the Anastasis, which I think is much more appropriate, the Church of the Resurrection, right? Because he's buried in the tomb, he rises from the tomb. Mm-hmm. And one of the amazing things is that the church is actually built around the hill, Golgotha, or Calvary, Mount Calvary. And they're almost, a lot of things they say, well, we don't know where this, well, they're pretty sure this is it, because it's been venerated since AD 60. And, Eric, all of these phrases would have happened exactly there. And I think one of the amazing things about being in this place, and look, I'm saying these things, sometimes I'm aware that when I say these things about the Holy Land, some people will say, oh, I'll never be able to go. And this is not to make you feel bad that you can't go or you don't have to go, but it's just to kind of give an insight. One of the things that is notable about the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is that it is built around this hill. And when you walk up a staircase and you can say Mass at the top of it's called the Calvary Chapel, you're walking up the same incline that Jesus walked up. So it's a really sort of very visceral and personal experience of Jesus would have walked up this incline. And so whenever I think about him on that cross, I think about that incline. He literally, it's the same incline. They didn't change the hill, and it's pretty steep. So I think about that a lot. I think about just the reality of, it really happened. The reality that theologians call it the scandal of particularity, right? It happened in a particular time and in a particular place. So for me, it's the realness of that.
Yeah, I've been lucky to be there, and the hill is a big image. Also, I'm shocked by the distance between the hill and the tomb. In my mind, I always thought it was miles and miles away.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things that I brought me to tears once in the Holy Land, I'm not embarrassed to say it, was there's a sung, what do you call it, passion narrative. And I think it's John's Gospel, and it ends with, I don't sing very well. It ends with, and the tomb was nearby, right? And it's this beautiful, and the tomb was nearby, it just kind of ends very hauntingly. And the first time I went and was telling some pilgrims, I said, and by the way, the tomb is nearby. And I thought of that, it's the end of the whatever passion narrative that is. And it is literally, Eric's right. The hill's there, and then the tomb's 10, 15 feet away. And, again, a lot of us, most of us won't be able to get there, but it's good to know that. It's good to know that these things are real and that the tomb was nearby. So it is amazing. It's amazing. I started to cry in front of everybody, and they all were putting their hands on me. This is outside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I was so embarrassed. I was I'm not doing this for effect. You know what I mean? It was.
Yeah, it just came over you.
It did, but it's funny, the things that move different things move different people. Now, the sad part about that story is that if this was a great story, I would have sang this perfect verse that I remembered. I couldn't even remember it.
That's great.
Maybe there's some singers on here that remember it.
That could do that. We'll poll the group afterward.
Yeah, right.
Jane, just before the next question, I just want to let people know, as we get towards the end of questions, if anyone has questions that they'd like us to ask, I encourage you to put those in the chat so I can see those while we're going through the next couple questions. So
I invited people to be facilitators of our small groups, and we have a willing and generous cohort of people who are happy to do that. I see some of them here on the screen. Thank you. There are no reflection questions in your book. So Here's what I have posed.
Is that right? That's actually surprising. I didn't put any reflection questions.
No, you didn't. So that's an omission or something. But no, it leaves us able to be creative. So here, I want to hear what you think about these questions, or if you might adjust them or edit them. But they're very simple. And the first one would be, what struck you or has stayed with you about the words of Jesus this week? So, you know, in the chapter that you've written, what's staying with you? And then secondly, this is kind of related to what I said to you before. Is there a personal relationship or aspect of your life where these words of Jesus are encouraging you or maybe challenging you?
I like those words. Yeah.
And then lastly, this is a good Ignatian question. As you reflect on these words this week, what grace, right? What grace do you want to receive?
They're great questions.
So just those three. Any other thoughts about them?
Yeah, I would say, yeah, those are like, that's like really, I want to say exhaustive, but those are terrific questions.
Good.
Yeah, I would say in an Ignatian way, what other words can you imagine Jesus saying on the cross? You know, because obviously he would have said more, one would imagine. And so what does he say to the good thief and the bad thief? What does he say to the people who are mocking him? What does he say to the soldier, right, who gives him the wine? I mean, we all know these stories so well. I think one of the most powerful parts of that story for me, it's not kind of contained in the 7 last words. And I've thought about it a lot. You know, a lot of I do this LGBTQ ministry and get a lot of pushback and all that kind of stuff. And one of the things that just has been really meaningful to me in the last couple of years is, which just kind of blew me away. There's a passage, I'm not sure which gospel, where they say the passersby came by and taunted him and say, ha ha. And in the Greek, it's, I guess, Omicron, Upsilon, Alpha, it's wah wah. Like they actually say in the Greek, ha ha. Like they don't say he laughed. I mean, they say this, and I just think, boy, you know, he's on the cross and they're still making fun of him. It's for me, that's so powerful. Like, it's not enough that now we think he's probably naked, you know, he's probably would have been naked for sort of maximum humiliation. So he's naked on the cross. And by the way, I always think that Jesus comes into the world naked and leaves the world naked, comes into the world, it's very human. Not only have they crucified him, and not only is he suffering, they're making fun of him. You know, come down from that cross, show us what you can do, right? So you know, Jane, one of the questions is what else can you imagine him saying? What would if you were writing something, what would you imagine him saying? What would what would Jesus's last words for you be?
I like that. That's good. I'll add that to the instructions for the facilitators.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Sure.
Not seeing a ton of questions come in, and actually, I've messed something up. Alice, I've direct messaged you 4 times Jane's reflection questions. I apologize. That was supposed to be to everyone, but you know, I'm getting older and not so great at technology, so I'll have to figure out what I'm doing here.
That's right. But if people have questions.
Yeah, I think, Jim, one of the things that, well, I have a couple, but I know every year, have you released what you're giving up for Lent? I know that's a topic that your good friend talks to you about.
Yeah, you know, it's funny. I just got an email from him. So some people, so funny. This is a lighthearted story. And we have some time. So I went to the University of Pennsylvania and I graduated in 1982. And at the time and currently, Penn had a lot of Jewish people going there. And most of my friends at Penn were Jewish. And I would say around junior year, we were all living in a house off campus and Lent came up and I was the one Catholic in the group, actually one of 2. And they said, oh, what's Lent? And, I was not very well catechized. And I said, oh, blah, 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 you give something up. And I can remember this conversation. And they said, well, who decides what you give up? Which is a reasonable question to ask. Like from the outside, you would think, well, obviously like the church does or your priest does. And I said, I do. And they're like, well, I'll never get it. They're like, what kind of a sacrifice is that? When you think about it, it's true. Well, what is that? You tell yourself what to give up? And I said, well, yeah. Now, you remember, here I am. I'm this 18-year-old, 19-year-old Catholic. I said, well, why? What's wrong with that? Well, that's ridiculous. We should tell you what to give up. So I said, all right. So they said, this year you're going to give up. And this was years ago. I used to drink a lot of orange soda. You're going to give up Fanta.
Fanta.
And do you remember those, not tasty cake, Hostess snowballs? Remember those? Yeah,
sure. With so the coconut.
Yeah, I used to, when you're young, you can eat whatever you want. They said, you're going to give up those. And I was like, wow, it was actually hard. So they did that for the next 2 years. And then there was a group of them that got together every year and would send me my penances. And now it is my friend Rob Schlackman, who was my roommate out of college, who faithfully, it's like 40 years, every Ash Wednesday morning, he sends me my penance. And I did a little thing on NPR. And so now people ask me, he just sent me an email. I probably have, he may have sent it to me right now. Sometimes he sends them early. Let me check. But yesterday he said, what's coming up? Something's coming up. He's the only Jewish guy I know who is like, obsessed with Ash Wednesday. So he sends me every year. It's a spice, a food stuff, and a candy. So they're usually food things. The year I entered the Jesuits, you're going to laugh, but what the hell? The year I entered the Jesuits, it was sex. You're giving up sex for Lent. And his wife and his son, who's in college, shows you how old I am. So, but no, he's faithful, and I actually give it up. Sometimes they're hard. Sometimes it's like, like you're gonna have hamburgers. I was like, whoa. So that's my, and I'll get them. I usually tweet them out because people are interested. But it is funny, and he is completely. I mean, like 7 a.m. on Ash Wednesday, I'll get an email from Rob. Here it is. And it'll be like, and he's always very funny. It's like, shalom, It's very funny. This is a digression, but one of the things that I sometimes am invited to give talks to Jewish groups. And one of the things I say to Jewish groups is I always ask for their apology at the beginning, because I'm so comfortable with my Jewish friends. And, we're like, you tease each other that I'm sometimes, too comfortable. I will make some joke or something. So that's Rob. Rob gives me my Lenten penance every year. So like sometimes it's like, hamburgers, Mike and Ike's, and cilantro. That would be a typical year.
So then do you report back to him on Easter morning?
Yes.
Right.
And he'll, like, every couple days, he'll be like, how's it going? And sometimes I'll be out. I mean, I do it, look, I give up, I do real things too. I don't want to say these aren't real, but I do it as a kind of, I don't know, it's kind of a nice thing to have someone else tell you. Mm-hmm. But sometimes I'll be out at a restaurant and they'll be like, oh, one year was béarnaise sauce. And they brought béarnaise sauce, and I was like, I gave it up for Lent. And my friends were like, what kind of person gives up béarnaise sauce for Lent? I said, well, that's for my friend Rob. Funny.
That's hilarious.
Jane, my chat function seems to be malfunctioning, so I'm not sure that I can see if anyone's posted anything.
I don't see any chats.
I don't see any chat either.
Questionless crowd.
People. What are your questions? You guys, this is your opportunity.
Ask whatever you want. Ann Filer is raising her hand, but she's muted.
Can you unmute yourself, Ann?
Me, Ann, or the other Ann?
Ann Filer.
Ann Filer.
Okay.
Still muted. There's a little button with that says mute that you just touch on the left-hand side on your screen. Or maybe you can just put it in the chat. How might we use our imagination, says Paula Weber. Well, you know, I think imagining Jesus on the, I know this, imagining Jesus on the cross, the Ignatian style would be to say, what do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? What do you taste? What do you smell? You know, really imagine what it looks like, and, you know, to place yourself in the scene and to remember that God is, you know, kind of giving you your imagination for a reason. And one of the reasons we are given the imagination is so we can encounter Christ and other scriptural characters, right, in our prayer, and just see what happens. You know, notice what comes up. That's the key. Memories, feelings, insights, emotions, desires, words and phrases, you know, especially insights. In this kind of thing, it would be, wow, Jesus is, one of the things I had an insight recently, you know, when he says, Father, forgive them, they do not know what they're doing. So I always looked at that as a, you know, I am forgiving them, right? So I always looked at that as Jesus is forgiving them, right? And that's important to forgive people, but he's also praying for them. And maybe I read this somewhere, but isn't that interesting? He is Father. So there's kind of something that can happen while you're praying, just an insight. So just pay attention to the kinds of things that happen when you place yourself in these scenes.
Jim, one of the questions there was, is there a particular image of Jesus on the cross that you like praying with?
Well, you know, I am a person of a certain age. I am 62. And
which musical am I about to hear about?
No, well, which TV show are you going to hear about? Jesus of Nazareth, 1977, Franco Zeffirelli. For me, is, I see some people nodding. By the way, it's on YouTube. For those of you who might be younger or haven't seen it, Jesus of Nazareth was I was just writing about this in another book, was actually a mini series, not a film, that first aired on Easter time in 1977. Beautiful. Now, the guy who plays Jesus, Robert Powell, he's a little too white, you know, Jesus was, but for me, that's who it is when I imagine Jesus. That's still my image. It's amazing how that kind of stuff influences you.
Stays with you.
We got some questions in the chat. Let's see.
That's an interesting one about what do you understand in Jesus's relationship with his mother? So the words of Jesus sound strange. The person's asking.
Yeah. So, woman, there is your son. Son, there is your mother. Jesus says to the beloved disciple. You know, it's interesting. I actually think those are very beautiful words, because he is basically asking the beloved disciple. That's a whole other story. We can talk about that. I wrote a book on Lazarus that's coming out in September, and I make the argument, I mean, along with other scholars, that the beloved disciple is actually Lazarus, which we can get into maybe at another book reading. But whoever the beloved disciple is, it is Jesus basically trying to take care of his mom. And then it says, then the beloved disciple took Mary, actually in John's gospel, it always says his mother, it's never Mary, into his home. So it's kind of beautiful that he's even in his last moments, he's thinking about his mother. Someone says, as a mother, I relate more to Mary's pain at seeing her son suffer. Absolutely. And if you go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, there's a spot where that by tradition they think Mary stood, and, you know, at the foot of the cross. Use imagination to imagine how my own words at my death continue the prioritizing what Jesus chose to verbalize. Great reflection is springboard from this. That's really interesting. My own words at my death continue the prioritization of what Jesus chose to verbalize. That's really beautiful. You know, like, what would we say? Right. But imagine how shocking it would be to hear, my God, why have you abandoned me? Right. From the lips of a believer. Right. And then to imagine those on Jesus's lips. It's so profound. It's so human.
Jim, one of the things that came in a direct message to me was it was back to the giving things up for Lent thing. One of the things, should we also be doing things, not just giving things up?
Yeah, there's a nice article on that by Joe Laramie, who's a Jesuit in America. And I personally, now look, I'm not going to say that we should abandon giving things up. That's really helpful for a lot of people. Fasting originally was supposed to help us save money so we could give it to the poor, right? It wasn't simply about fasting. And there's certain benefit of, kind of reminding yourself that you govern your body, right? That you have control over your body. You're just not your passions. But I actually think it's better to do something. And my constant Lenten practice is to try to be kind. That's my goal. And I think that, boy, if we could, I would rather, and it's not, I don't want to denigrate anybody, but I think the world would be a better place if instead of giving up chocolate, we were just kinder to each other. Someone said, after pondering all these words, which ones seem more authentic than their forsaken ones? What is oral history? That is a very, I think, tough question. I would suggest myself that because these are words from Jesus on the cross, that most of them probably go back to the historical Jesus. But I would say probably for me, the most authentic, if you had to rank them, would be my God, why have you abandoned me? I mean, that is just, again, that is not something that people would make up and put on Jesus's lips. Another person says, after a long retreat meditating on Good Friday, how should we experience Holy Saturday? Yes, the forgotten member of the Triduum.
Yeah.
I remember I asked a liturgist once, I said, so like a lot of us, and I'm sure Bellarmine Chapel has these liturgies, a lot of us will go to Good Friday, maybe a Good Friday liturgy at 7 p.m., right? And then the next day, 24 hours later, 8 p.m. is the Easter liturgy. And I remember saying to a liturgist, how is that 3 days? I said, how is that 3 days in the tomb? That doesn't make any sense. He's dead, 7 o'clock. And then 24 hours later, he's like, well, because the Jewish people counted days different way, and it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So technically, but I think Holy Saturday is a really sort of, it's its own day. And I think Holy Saturday for me is about waiting. And most of our lives are not Good Friday. They're not unimaginable pain. And they're certainly not Easter Sunday, unimaginable joy. Most of our lives are Holy Saturday. I really believe that. Most of our lives are waiting for something to happen, waiting for to get into a good school, waiting for the vacation, waiting for doctor's results, waiting for. So I think Holy Saturday is really a kind of opportunity for us to learn the value of Christian waiting.
Jim, it's interesting when you bring that, because when I became a pastor, for the first time in my life, Holy Saturday became preparation. It's like we've got to get ready now.
Yeah.
Like I had something to do in Holy Saturday, whereas it used to just kind of wait.
Yeah, and you could say, Wendell Berry penned this line, "Practice resurrection." I love that. So another question from Linda: My God, why have you forsaken me? This is an experience of Jesus' experience. Is this an experience of Jesus' experience in the dark night? Yeah, the dark night, it has a certain definition, but it's certainly Jesus experiencing, I think, the human feeling of, I don't know why this is happening. And I really believe that, and this may be wrong, and there are indications in the Gospels that Jesus knew exactly what was happening. He predicts his death. He predicts that he's going to be raised in 3 days. He talks about the cross. But the way I read it, I think while he trusted that the Father was always going to be faithful to him, I don't know if he knew what was going to happen on Easter Sunday. Elizabeth Johnson has this great quote that says, he may not have understood his vocation entirely or even his identity until Easter Sunday, when his ultimate identity burst upon him in full clarity, which I just think is gorgeous. And so that to me makes Good Friday even more meaningful, right? So is it the dark night? I'm not sure exactly, but it's certainly an experience of feeling. The other is there is the difference between feeling abandoned and believing you're abandoned. So I think all of us here believe in God and believe that God is with us, but we can feel abandoned, right? So I know this is far in the future, says Emily, but are there daily practices for the Easter season? When it's Lent, I'm always conscious because of Lenten practices, but during Easter, the rhythm of my days feels like they go back to normal. Well, as one of my housemates always says about Christmas too, Easter is a whole season.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things is that, one of the things to do during the Easter season is the same way that we would meditate on the 7 last words, meditate on the resurrection stories. There's a lot of them. And they tend to just get sort of thrown out like, oh, there's one after another. It's hard to keep up, the Emmaus and, the peace be with you. And, just at the tomb, with Mary Magdalene, there's a lot. And, really, really spend time on this idea, this reality of the resurrection. Where do you experience resurrection in your own life? But I think to make sure that our days don't go back to normal, to spend time on the resurrection passages. They tend to get ripped.
It's good to bring that up because Jane, didn't Paul so the pastor of St. Xavier has been talking about, he wants us to be very conscious about doing some more practices for Easter because it's a longer season and we tend to forget it. We do a ton of stuff for Lent, but let's pay attention to Easter.
Everyone loves Ash Wednesday and Lent, and then it's like, oh, okay, Easter, goodbye.
One of the ways
Go ahead.
One of the ways I like to see it, understand it, is that Lent ought to increase our capacity for Easter joy. Mm-hmm. So as much investment as we make into Lent, as much as we let ourselves be converted in our minds and our hearts, the way we're called to tomorrow on Ash Wednesday, that will increase our own capacity for the joy of Easter, the whole Easter season.
That's a beautiful way of saying it, Jane. Thank you.
I like that. Thank you.
Maybe one more question.
Yeah, I say, Jim, we promised you we'd get you out of here 8:15. So
Thanks.
one more, the last question. Tomorrow is the first Ash Wednesday. My wife and I are going to attend together with our young kids versus attending separately. How might you describe the symbolism of the ashes to elementary aged children?
Oh boy, I'm always leery of answering that question because A, I don't have children. B, I've never taught young children. C, I'm not a psychologist, and I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong. I would say, look, here's what I would say to Nick. I would say, trust yourself. Trust yourself and explain it the way you think that your kids would like to hear. Because God did not put me in front of your kids. I'm not their father, right? If you want some, I might say something like it's a sign of what we believe, right? And it's a visible sign that shows us what we believe. I don't know if I'd get into the whole thing like you're going to turn into ashes. That might be a little freaky for a young kid. But say it's a sign. It's a sign of our belief in God and that this is the start of the season, something like that. Well, listen, I want to say before we end, thank you so much to Eric and Jane. I'd ask you, I think I told you at the beginning, my mom's really sick and I'm actually in Philadelphia to help move her into skilled nursing. I'm sure you all know what that's like. So I'd really, really appreciate your prayers for tomorrow when we're moving her. She's also sick and has cancer and it's kind of a mess. So I would appreciate your prayers. So thanks very much.
Certainly, Jim. We really appreciate you making time in the midst of everything that's going on with your family to be with us. So we will definitely be praying with and for you and your whole family tomorrow.
Thanks. Should we end with a prayer?
Yes. Why don't you,
Jane, do you want to pray for us, Jane?
Sure. God of mercy, God of love, God who calls us to open and change our minds and our hearts. We ask your spirit. No, we claim your spirit to be with us during these weeks of Lent. May our eyes and ears be open to a new understanding of you, Jesus, how we can be your disciples and live into your death and through your death into our risen life, even here in this life. So we ask your blessing on all of our groups and all of the individuals who will be praying, so that our Easter indeed might be more joyous. We pray this in the name of the risen Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thanks, everybody.
Amen.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for being with us tonight. And prayers for everyone for a blessed and renewing Lent. May it increase your capacity for Easter.